Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our Pacific Division Sheltering Capacity Building series. My name is Yi-Wei. I am your host. I'm a volunteer, and this series is brought to you by the Pacific Division Sheltering Leadership. Several reminders, your mic and your camera has been currently turned off. You are able to use the chat function. So there are two things. One in the chat, I encourage you to put your name and your region in the chat. There's also a Q&A function on the very top next to chat. You can use that function to ask any questions. And I kindly ask you to let our presenters to answer the questions instead of answering questions among ourselves. This session is recorded. It will be posted to YouTube later on tonight. All the slides will be ready in the email that was originally sent out. It's a live document. Every week we have the session every Wednesday at 4 o'clock Pacific Daylight Savings Time. It's going to be the same link, same session, same time. And today we welcome back two of our presenters. We welcome Hillary from Northern California Coastal Region. She is a Master Chief and she recently deployed to DR 77024. That was the Texas flood. She just came back. We also welcome Sandy from Alaska Region. She is a Master Generalist Manager and she is a sheltering manager from Alaska Region. She is also the regional sheltering regional program lead. And let's turn back to them to see what they're going to share with us for the sheltering world.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy, and I am a volunteer as well. Like Yi-Wei said, I am up in Alaska and spend a lot of time doing Red Cross. Hillary, you want to introduce yourself, and then we can just jump right in.
Hillary, if you're talking, we're not able to hear you. Sandy, would you like to start?
Sure. Okay, we have titled our presentation, Did I Miss Something? And we're going to talk about topics that may have been not completely explained or understood in previous trainings. Next. So this is disaster relief operations work performance evaluations is what we're going to talk about first. Next. So we have three groups that use the performance evaluations. That would be you, yourself, to check and see if you've done your job correctly. There are ideas for growing, classes that you might want to take, and you receive a genuine appreciation for the job that you have just completed. The second group that will use performance reviews is your home chapter or territory. They're always looking for volunteers to promote and to fill regional and territorial positions. If classes are suggested, your home territory can help you find them. And then thirdly, your division or the national level will use your performance reviews for promotion purposes. So when someone puts in a packet for a promotion, a certain number of performance reviews are required. Next. Evaluations are completed prior to the end of the disaster relief operation. They're usually reviewed with the workers before they leave the work site. That is the best thing to do. A lot of times it's not possible to get it done that way, and you do have to wait till after you get home, but it's kind of a disappointment when that happens. They're completed by the worker's direct supervisor. And an evaluation or work performance review is required after 7 days on the job. You can request one as early as 3 days, but normally if it's 4 to 7, you're going to want to request one there as well. It's always required if the worker is dismissed for poor performance, and regardless of the position held in volunteer connection, you have to be evaluated solely on the quality of the work that was done on that particular job. So when you accept a position that's a greater responsibility than you're originally assigned to, you're held to the same expectations as all the other workers that are assigned to perform the same duties. Next. So you're going to want to make a schedule. When you're assigned a shift, you start to collect information on those that are assigned to you. And we're going to go through and show you how to do that in just a minute. So you're going to check your staff list to see who's leaving soon and who doesn't have a review yet. Those are going to be the first ones that you want to tackle. You're going to meet with them as soon as possible to get to know them and make sure you keep an eye on their performance right away. So to get a feel for what they're doing and how. And then for the rest of the staff, you're going to want to schedule 2 meetings, one a week into their deployment, and then another one 2 days out from their exit date. So you're going to want to keep track of their vacation days and their out processing days as well. Next. So you're going to want to meet with your workers a week into the deployment. That'll be your first meeting. So you want to keep it informal. Let those people know that they're not in trouble right off the bat, because people tend to get real nervous when you talk about performance evaluations, even though they know that they've done a good job. So you want to meet in a space where you won't be interrupted and you do have some privacy. And then always explain to them why you are meeting. So take a few breaths before you start to shake off the stress of the day. Um, Start off by explaining why, ask them how it's going. And then you're also going to want to look to see if they were feel like they were sufficiently trained. Um, what do they want to be when they grow up? Where do they see themselves in 4 years or 5 years? Find out how you can help them to have a good deployment. And if there is an issue somewhere along the line about their performance, take the time to address it and ask them what they think they could do to improve that. In closing, let them know that you're there for them and they are greatly appreciated, and always take notes. Next. So where are the forums? We're going to show you how to locate the forums. Next. When you open your home page on your Volunteer Connection, this is what your home page, your profile looks like. So this is mine, obviously. Nothing is different on this one. This is a day-to-day version. So you're going to want to look over here underneath your name at all these headings where you find OneSource and Edge. This is what a normal one will look like. And next. This is what one will look like when you're deployed as a supervisor. So obviously this is the lovely Hillary's homepage, and Hillary just got back from a 3-week deployment to Houston where she was a supervisor. So if you will notice circled in red under Hillary's name there's something on there that there wasn't on mine. It says DRO team roster, which stands for disaster relief operation. So it doesn't appear except when you are deployed as a supervisor, and that DRO team roster stays there visible on your homepage for 7 days following the day that you out process from the disaster response. Next. This is just a quick snapshot of what the instructions look like for doing performance reviews on OneSource. We're going to walk through each of these steps. Next. So here is the first page of a performance evaluation. The heading on this should automatically be filled out when you're using the online form. So check to make sure the dates are correct on here. You can type on this as well. So you're going to want to add any pertinent information, such as a specialty track or a qualification. You can fill in that blank where it says assignment on there as well. And then if you want, there is a paper form also available online. You find that in OneSource. If for some reason you don't have access to the internet or you just can't get started on it, you can pull up a paper form and print that out and work on there as well. What I like to do as a supervisor, and I think a lot of supervisors follow the same thing, you begin these right when you first meet the people. I like to go in and start this performance evaluation and just put a few notes in there and make notes to myself of what I am seeing and my initial impression of the staff that is working under you. You can always go back in and change it. You can save it and save it and save it and go back and edit and edit and edit. So it's not set in stone until you submit it. Next. So the next thing under the headings is the performance criteria. This is pretty self-explanatory. You just read through those work requirements and check off whether you find that person was exceptional, effective, or inconsistent at that job. The work requirements are the same in the under performance criteria, whether you're filling out the paper form or whether you're doing it online. Next. The interpersonal skills that you'll find on the online form, you will note follow the 5 C's, which are the 5 Red Cross values. So you're going to score each person on collaboration, commitment, compassion, credibility, and creativity. Next. Then, if that person that you are evaluating also performed as a supervisor, you're going to score them on their supervisory performance. If they were not a supervisor, so if that person was an SA, you just skip over this section. This one and next, Iwe, is just the more underneath the supervisory performance tab. Again, you just skip it if that person was an SA. Next. So this is the most important part of the review. Take time to be thorough and honest. You're going to want to take a few hours away from your job to fill out all of these, depending on how many folks you are supervising. You don't want it to have any surprises for the volunteer or the staff member. Like I said earlier, it can be started as early as possible, saved and returned to over and over again until you feel like it fits and that you're happy with the outcome. On this section, you're going to want to list classes or trainings that you think this person might benefit from. And you're also going to list things such as local deployments to gain confidence, or maybe attend more national deployments to enhance their knowledge and skills. And then that last one there, you make your suggestions that that worker either be promoted or stay at the same level, or if they received a poor performance review, you will check one of the other boxes. Next. So these are some tips on filling out the performance review. Divide the narrative into 3 sections and then refer back to why we care, which was the section listing remember the 3 different groups of people that use these reviews. So part 1, what was the job they filled, what was the setting, and what were the conditions they were working under. So this example here fills in all 3 of those questions. Paul served as a sheltering SA in a large congregate shelter with 100 clients. It was a stressful time on the DR as the fires were ever changing and locations of the shelters needed to be continually changing. Being as this was a congregate shelter, there were concerns regarding COVID. So in that one little paragraph, this person answered all 3 of those questions. Next. Part 2 is where you go through how they performed their duties, strengths and challenges, interactions, and nothing should be a surprise to the volunteer or staff member. When they get this performance review, they shouldn't be shocked at what they read. This section is a good reality check. Once you complete this one, go back to the performance criteria, make sure it matches the description. And make sure the description matches what you have said. And like I keep saying over and over again, make adjustments as necessary. Keep coming back to it. Next. So this is a final version of the narrative on Paul's performance evaluation. Paul is a team player and showed great flexibility. You will see that sentence on probably 8 or 9 times out of 10 when you get performance evaluations. It's a great one. It encompasses everything, but you want to be sure and expand upon that and not just use that as your narrative and end there. Go on to explain a little more. Whatever was needed to be done, Paul was the first to offer to help. On and on. Paul was an out-of-the-box thinker, which allowed us to give better service to our clients. Paul displayed his dedication to the principles of the Red Cross. And then lastly, they explained that Paul had some challenges with chain of command and had some incidences where it created issues, that they were discussed, and he was responsive. More training was suggested. Next. So then lastly, you end with your good goodbye. Always remember that. That's part of our Red Cross motto, is end everything with a good goodbye. Express your gratitude, make them feel appreciated, and be sure that you make them want to deploy again. Next. And then lastly, there is the review process, which is where after you submit this online, it goes to your supervisor who reviews the performance evaluation, adds their own narrative if they see fit to do so, and then they are the one that finally approves it and sends it to the volunteer's profile. So on Volunteer Connection, if you are looking for one of your own evaluations, you can personally go back and look at each one of these. You just go to the Disaster Cycle Services tab on your Volunteer Connection profile, check under your DR history, the disaster response history, and then choose the overall performance tab and look for the blue links under each of those to see the one that you want to see. And that is the conclusion of the evaluation. I'm going to pass it to Hillary.
Okay. You guys can hear me now, I hope?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. Iwe, did you want to jump in with any questions before I go ahead, or should I just charge forth?
Sure. We'll do one question. Excuse me. We have one question. What is the metric for recommending a promotion?
That's a really good question.
Hillary, can you answer that one?
I can, yeah. So it depends on what the job is, what the gap is that you're coming from and going to. And I would say, generally speaking, this is with my workforce engagement hat on, every gap has a job description. It's called a global position description in Red Cross speak, and it lists out what the responsibilities are of someone in that position, what the training requirements are, what the physical requirements are, the experience requirements. All of that is all in like a 1 or 2 page document for each gap. So I would suggest knowing what the requirements are for that next level position and what the experience required is, before saying that anyone should promote. However, you can say in your narrative that you can see them promoting with more experience, or you recommend that they as soon as they finish these classes with the experience they've got, they would be good for a promotion, if that helps. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Let's move forward and let's take all the questions towards the end. And again, a reminder, if you have questions, please type into the Q&A section. The reason is we have too many chats. It's really difficult to follow through when we have questions in the chats, but not in the Q&A. Okay, all back to you, Hillary. If you want to introduce yourself one more time to say who you are.
You mean actually do it this time? Yeah, so
Yes.
I am Hillary King. I am here in beautiful Marin County, which is part of the Northern California coastal region. If I weren't looking at a hill, I'd be seeing the Golden Gate Bridge right now. And we're having a heat wave for us. And as Iwe said I just got back from a deployment to Houston in my very first outing as mass care chief. So I'm a newly minted mass care chief, but grew up in and, well, that sounds weird. I come from the sheltering world, and that's my passion. So anyway, okay, so I'm going to start with just like a little warm-up slide, and this is just breaking it down sort of to brass tacks. When you are first in a shelter, either when it's opening or at the beginning of your shift, just think about these things. Are the clients comfortable? Do they understand what's going on? Is SKYA being maintained properly? Are there long lines to register or even to get meals? Things like that, because that's part of your job as a supervisor, is to make sure all those things are happening. Doesn't mean you have to do them all yourself, because this job is all about delegating, but it does need to happen. So next slide, that was the easy one. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about communication, partly because it's just obviously so important, and partly because when we do after action reviews for our bigger DROs and even the smaller ones, there's always an issue with communication. Whether it's to outside parties, whether it's between the local region and the national team on the DR, or any which way there could be communication, we always struggle. So I just want to make sure that people are thinking about the importance of that and making sure that you're doing everything you can to keep communication solid. So, in terms of communications between a shelter and HQ, really important. You're the voice of that shelter, and HQ needs to hear from you. So, there's regularly scheduled meetings, like a shelter managers meeting. There's other meetings that come up when there's something, some new topic comes up, something's going to be changing, and so HQ will reach out and say, hey, we need to meet with you or meet with all of your staff on something. And then there are also reports that I know seem like an annoyance when you're in a shelter, and don't these people at HQ understand I'm trying to deal with clients? But those reports are a really important and essential communication tool. So you've got your daily shelter report, which is very different from how it used to be, which was all just boxes and numbers, and now it's more short answer questions as opposed to true and false, if you were thinking about it like an exam. There's shelter inventories, help tell the story of your shelter, your population counts, your meal counts. All of those things are ways that you can help headquarters who's not there understand what's going on in your shelter and what the needs are. So it's really important that you meet the deadlines that are set by headquarters, and that reporting's not optional. It's not like if you have time, then maybe you'll get your counts in, or if you're not busy sweeping, you can make contact with headquarters. No, it doesn't really work that way. And while you're doing all of those super important tasks in the shelter, there's people in headquarters somewhere that have what we call a battle rhythm. And that is basically the timeline of the day, and different meetings and reports that get done at HQ rely on the information from the shelters, and they need that information in order to plan, so you at the shelters can get what you need, and to make sure that that the leadership understands the issues, the problems, the good things that are going on at your shelter. So in addition to those regularly scheduled daily meetings, there might be times, there probably will be times where something urgent comes up on your end and you need to get in touch with HQ or vice versa. So make it a point to work out with whoever is your contact at HQ, whether it's the sheltering manager or an assistant sheltering manager, to figure out the best way to exchange information. Sometimes it's really hard to take a phone call because you might be in a meeting, but you could look at your texts and send them back a quick answer, or know that this is like a emergency, I need to hop up and go call my shelter. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so while at a shelter, there's also a big need for communication within that community of the shelter itself. So you want to foster an exchange of information, and that's between you and the clients, between the different staff members, between the Red Cross staff and the partners that are there. And there's all kinds of ways we can do this depending on what the information need is. So having client meetings where you're updating them on things you're finding out. Agency briefings, that's a big thing here in Northern California, and I know in a lot of your regions where CAL FIRE, for example, will come in and they'll bring their big map and they'll show everybody in the shelter where the fire breaks are and what part they're working on and where they've done their damage assessment. So super important for clients to get that kind of information. There's like a cork board or a whiteboard where people can leave messages. There's flyers that people will leave at the shelter for people to get services, shift change meetings with staff, all kinds of things like that. And one really important thing to keep in mind is the rumor mill is strong during a disaster. It's strong at a shelter. So two things I would say on that is, one, be really careful about what you say and who can hear it, and also how it might be perceived. So you could be joking that, this shelter is going to be open until August. Well, that client that heard you doesn't know that you're joking, and they're thinking either you know something they don't know and they're not going to be able to get home until August, or they're going to just settle in, and why bother talking to these shelter resident transition people because I get to be here till August. Neither of those is good. And another way that you can help deal with rumors is keep an eye out and see who your community leaders are within your shelter. I don't mean official, but people that seem to have some influence over what the clients are talking about or thinking about, and try and get them to help tamp down any rumors or spread things that you do want to get out there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned a shift change meeting. It's really, really easy when you're working in a shelter to think, I have been here for 12 or 13 hours already. I don't want to stay later so I can tell the next shift what's going on. I don't want to get up any earlier and come in earlier so I can hear it. But it's really important. It's really the only way to exchange information with the people that have been working and got new updates, to get them to you and for you to ask questions about what's been going on. There's a lot of different topics to cover. You can find them on one source, but just make sure to do it, and you can whittle it down to a pretty quick meeting. You don't have to talk about everything that happened in the shelter that day. We do have logs. We do have other ways of communicating, but you do want to make sure that there is a chance to exchange any important info. Okay, let's go on. So one of the other things that I mentioned is a daily shelter report. And again, I know nobody wants to sit down and do paperwork when you feel like you're running around, but it is a really important way to, again, tell headquarters what types of things you need and what's going on at your shelter. The first section in it talks about meals, and that might be collected through this report, or it might be collected separately from someone on the feeding staff. And that's all going to depend on the supplier, how they're acquiring meals, what their deadlines are for ordering, things like that. You want to use the daily shelter report as a guide in thinking about the people, the supplies, the services you need for your shelter. You may not get everything you ask for, but if you don't ask for it, you definitely won't get it. I just had multiple occasions when I was just in Houston where people said, well, we don't have this, or we never got that. And then we said, oh my gosh, what happened? When did you ask for it? How did you ask for it? And they say, well, we didn't. So you can guess what my answer was to that. You've got to ask for the things you need, and you've got to be the advocate for your shelter. So keep in mind as you're going through this report and thinking about it, it's not intended as a way for you to point out your own shortcomings or to say what's all terrible at your shelter. It's a good way to indicate to others what you need at that shelter for the clients to have the best stay they can. And again, since headquarters isn't on site, they can't see what's going on at your shelter. So you've got to be the advocate. Okay, next slide. And this is just the second half of this one-page shelter report. In terms of staff issues, is there something that you can do to improve things for the staff? Can you bring in staff relations if there's an actual issue going on? Do you just need more staff? Can you take it upon yourself to model appropriate behavior and reach out for help if needed? For supplies and equipment, like I said, 100% of things you don't ask for will not show up. So think about what can fulfillment, if you have it, or logistics bring today or tomorrow, and what are the bigger ticket items that you might need that might take a bit more time to get on site. And by that, I mean things like shower trailers if you don't have showers at your shelter, or laundry facilities, or other big things like that that aren't just down at the local Walmart. And then one other thing is to track your staff days off, track your last work day, which can be a confusing day for a lot of people. So make sure you have a good sense on when you have staff coverage, when you may not, and when you are going to need to ask for more. Okay, so that's one great method of communication. This is my art. I'm a terrible artist, but I tried. So shelter capacity is something you really don't see much in the doctrine, but I will tell you it's something that gets asked multiple times a day, every day in headquarters, and they turn around and are going to ask you, what's the capacity of your shelter? And the answer to that is not on the sign that's in the room that says, per order of the fire department, no more than 100 people can be here. That's not capacity. That's not when it's being used as a shelter. And if any of you have ever done the shelter surveys, you know that there's some math to it. You take measurements of the room. But what I'm trying to look at here is if someone asks you what's the capacity, don't think, well, how many cots can I fit in this space? Because that works if you have, say, a whole school at your disposal and you're only going to use the gym for sleeping. That's great. Oftentimes that's not what happens. So we need to think about carving out space for other things like feeding, like um, disaster health services, a registration table, potentially a little area for kids to play in or a TV area, things like that. So if someone asks you how many can be at the shelter, carve out some space. We do it typically, we consider about 40% of the space will be used for non-cot things. All that math is in the shelter surveys, but if you're on the spot and you're asked, just think about that and don't overestimate your capacity. Okay, let's move on. So reporting client counts, if you've ever worked in a shelter, you know that this is something that needs to be done. It often feels like someone else is asking about once an hour. Um, but our official or Red Cross client count happens at night when people are back at the shelter from their day's activities, and you count the people and you report it to FROST, which is Field Remote Operations Support Team. I think I got that right. Anyway, you're essentially telling them, and they're compiling it with all the other shelters on your DR and all the DRs in the country to say how many people we are sheltering in any given night and how it's broken down. Um, it's not just a straight heads on beds count. It's also not a count of putting putting your faith in your used to be paper registrations, but your SKYA number. It's kind of saying, who do I believe is still staying at the shelter, even if they're not in their bed right now? Um, and I think Sandy's going to talk a bit more about client counts later, but if not, we can circle back for sure. It's a super fun topic. And one thing that's important is being consistent day to day with how you're doing your counts. Um, and also just know that it's not just headquarters that will be asking. Oftentimes, the emergency managers will be asking, or politicians or judges if you're working in Texas and Louisiana. So have the information handy. You'll need to give it a lot. And the reason that these population counts are so important is that it's used for planning the response, resourcing the shelters, making sure you've got food, and making sure we have enough shelter space to handle all the clients comfortably. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned already, don't count just the people that are on forms or look at SKYA and say, well, that's how many. Actually do a count of the people. Don't forget the people outside. You want to be respectful of clients during counts. You don't want to go out and start like knocking on car doors and waking people up to see how many people they have in their car. There's better ways of doing that, like figuring out how many people kind of live in that car during the daytime. And then if the car is there, those people are there. Get to know the outside population. And really importantly, if your count doesn't match SKYA, investigate why. Don't wait for headquarters to ask. Don't wait for somebody to come up with a reason. And don't say, well, it's because people don't check out of SKYA. Because that's part of the job. We register people, but we also have to check them out. And so every day we need to be keeping on that system and making sure, if we haven't seen somebody for a couple days and we ask their cop neighbor, hey, have you seen John? And they say, oh yeah, John went to go stay with his mom. Well, you need to check him out of Skya then. You also want to make sure you don't have duplicate records, things like that. Okay, moving on. One final thing here is keep your shelter safe and keep it prepared. There we go. We have a document that honestly I haven't seen used that much, but it should be. It's supposed to be. And it's certainly going to come in handy should there ever be some sort of emergency or disaster at the disaster. You want to be able to have an emergency plan for your shelter. So if the floodwaters get too close or a new fire starts or the winds change, you want to know what are you going to do? And you want to make sure that the staff has access to the plan and knows what it is. And on top of just having an emergency plan, you also want to make sure you're doing the regular things that you need to do to keep your shelter safe. You don't want cords that people can trip on. You don't want to block the emergency exits or the fire extinguishers. You don't want to send staff out into the dark of night alone. So have them go in pairs. Just think about what is it that could possibly cause a problem at your shelter and make sure you're doing things to mitigate that. More forms, yay forms. Next slide. Tracking supplies. So this is another sort of method of communication where you are doing regular inventories of not just your shelter trailer, but what you've got on site there, right? You don't want to complain to fulfillment that they couldn't bring you something an hour after you asked for it when you should have known for days that you needed that. You don't want to say, well, our people were really hungry because we didn't have enough food for breakfast, because your job is to stay on top of it and be thinking 2-3 days ahead. Where am I going to be in terms of materials on hand, and what do I need to request to make sure that we don't come up short? You can use the very simple form that you see here. It's on OneSource, or you can create your own spreadsheet if that works better for you. I don't think people will really care what form it's in as long as it's useful and kept up. So next slide is a shelter log. Again, theme of communication. So there's two types of logs. One is the general shelter log, where you're going to put in everything from, the mayor's office came to visit, to media was here, to the heater broke and the facility person had to come and fix it, to some certain client had to go to the hospital. You want to include with that anything that you've done to take action to resolve that issue. Write in what the solution was. If there's anything confidential, like you can say that we had a client go to the hospital. What you're not going to say is client Bob Jones went to the hospital because he had a terrible rash and who knows, right? That's medical information. That's not necessary. And this is another thing to help trigger you when you're having your shift change meetings, to remind you of things that the next shift may have to follow up on. Like if you're working the night shift, you probably couldn't get the plumber out, but maybe the day shift can take over that and make sure that happens. And then on the next slide, shocking, it looks exactly the same. You want to have a separate one that's called a manager's log, and that's where you're recording anything that's really confidential that we don't want other staff to see, anything that's involving issues with staff that you might want to write up, issues with clients that you might want to write up. And again, this one is confidential. It's not going to be shown to other people. Potentially headquarters, you'll want to discuss those issues with headquarters. You might need to have health services or mental health do a follow-up with someone. Anyway, that's where you're putting your things that are not for general consumption. And I think this next one might be my last slide. So this is the operational planning worksheet, affectionately known as the 215. And it's a headquarters document. It basically shows all of your staff and all of your stuff that you have in your shelter, so you can see why we want you to keep track of staff and who's working that day, and rental cars, and how many boxes of blankets you have, and if you have a shower trailer. And this is one of those things that has to get done every day, hours and hours in advance of when you think it would. But the reason I threw it in here is because they've added a new feature to it, and that is the recommended counts for if you have a shelter that's for 50 people, here's how many cots you should have on hand, here's how many blankets, here's how many toilets there should be. And oh, thank you for highlighting there. And here's what your staff picture should be. So it's something that's out there. It's used by headquarters, but it's definitely coming from the information that you and the shelter have provided to headquarters, and they greatly appreciate it. And I think that's it for my piece, and we are going to go back to Sandy for more.
All right, thanks, Hillary. I did want to mention that Chris Hitchcock started putting these slide decks together, and then she got called away and had to be out of town and asked me to take over for her. So we need to be sure and give Chris credit for some of this presentation as well. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the dreaded night shift. So in a shelter, they're night and day. The two shifts have some similarities, and yet they do have some differences. So next slide, please, Iwe. So there are tasks that fall both during the day and at night. A lot of times you're going to encounter people who enjoy working the night shift, and then other times you're going to have everyone say, oh my goodness, no, please do not put me on the night shift, whatever you do. But there are a lot of people that enjoy working the night shift. Many of the shelter tasks are done day and night. You're going to be registering new clients no matter what time they walk in. So you're going to have someone there manning the registration desk 24 hours a day, because you never know when you might have a new client come in, or you also have to monitor visitors that walk in the door. And staff comes and goes, but you've got to have someone there at the registration the entire time. You're going to want to make sure the environment is safe and clean for all of your clients and for all of your staff. You're going to assess your client's needs and respond. You might have somebody wake up and need to see health services for some reason. You might have to call in one of your disaster health services people to take care of what is going on. So you're going to make appropriate referrals to those other services, such as disaster health services. You're going to provide snacks and water at night. You might want to take some of it out, just depending on how many children you have, and make sure that the snacks are appropriate for kids. And a lot of times parents will tell you what they don't want out on the table at night for the kids. You're going to want to keep your inventory. So you're going to take your inventory, and Hillary just showed you the form that you can do that on. You're going to make regular rounds at the shelter, including going outside. It's best to have two people together when you're making the rounds in your outdoor shelters. A lot of times those areas are not well lit, and always follow the Red Cross principle of keeping people together two at a time. So next slide. So the night shift usually runs from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Every once in a while, you'll see the hours be a little bit different, but typically they're 12-hour shifts, and it's either going to be 7 to 7 or 8 to 8. Hillary also talked about that short briefing, either at the beginning or at the end of your shift, or both. And it's an overlap so that you can share information with the day shift as to what went on during the night. And then when you come in for the night shift, they can share with you whatever it was that happened during the day. You're going to want to try to build relationships with clients. People tend to be a little bit more relaxed in the evening. Some of the hurry and scurry dies down in the evening. People want to talk, or they just want to spend quiet time. You're responsible for that midnight count that we were talking about. The midnight count is now sometimes referred to as the overnight population count. So you're going to see it called both of those things. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. You're going to help prepare for the following day. You're going to get things ready for breakfast in the morning. You may have people up so bright and early that it's incredible. Then again, you may have coffee drinkers that are up all night long. So you're going to have the coffee made and set up for breakfast in the morning early so that the day shift comes in, it's already done, and many of your clients will be up before the day shift comes into work. Next slide. So during the evening time when clients are settling in, it is a good time to listen and get to know them. Like I said, it's more chaotic, it's more relaxed. A good time to build rapport and listen and learn to people. It's a good time to gather your client demographics and complete the SCIA, or Shelter Client Information app, to add missing information. A lot of times, you just can't get it all filled in when people are registering if things get too chaotic. But it's a good time to go back into SCIA, make sure everything is complete. And if you're filling out paper forms for some reason, whether it's connectivity or whatever, this is a good time also to transfer those paper forms onto the online app. Make a space away from your sleepers for the night owls who have different body clocks. Some people have a hard time sleeping because they're worried. It's a very stressful time for them. Let them share their concerns with you. It's a good way for them to release concerns. And then also set up a space where people can play a quick game of cards, or maybe work on a puzzle as a good way to distract their minds. Next. So here we're going to talk a little bit more about that overnight population count, or the midnight count, as it is also referred to. You're going to work with the headquarters sheltering manager for the disaster response specific instructions on who you report those numbers to. Like Hillary said, you're going to be asked for those numbers constantly by different organizations, different people, different managers, but you want to find out who you're supposed to report those numbers to, because as the night shift, you're the ones that actually report the numbers to FROST, which is the Field Remote Operations Support Team. Or are you supposed to call a designated person on the DR to give them those numbers, and they report to FROST? So that's just something you're going to want to find out your first night on. The midnight count is not usually done at midnight. hardly ever do you see it wait till that late. It's usually due around 9 or 10 o'clock. Usually always has to be in by 11 at the latest per our standards. Again, talking about you're going to go cot to cot indoors, and you are going to look at heads on beds, but you also have to be aware of the people that are working different shifts, whether someone has gone out to dinner or out to a movie and will be back later, whether they're outside having a smoke. You're not going to take the numbers from the registrations, just like Hillary said. You're going to do inside and outside shelters on the Frost spreadsheet template that we now have to fill out. You're going to record the different numbers for indoor shelter and outdoor shelter. So for the inside count, you're going to count the clients who registered for dormitory services and that are present in the shelter at the time of your count. But you also count the ones that are expected to return to the shelter to sleep later. So you just want to make sure their stuff is still there. Make sure they didn't just pack up and take everything with them when they walked out. You're going to add all of your new registrations for the day. And also on the Frost spreadsheet template, we have to include our pet numbers. And it includes a breakdown of the type of pets, the location of those pets, and who the pet partner is. You're going to have to break it down as to how many dogs and how many cats and how many birds and how many turtles and how many snakes. So yeah, it's pretty definitive. All right, next slide. And then when you're going to go do the outside shelter count, we maintain that separate count for people staying outside. They might be staying in their motorhome. They might be in a tent. A lot of times we'll have clients who just want to sleep in their cars. But when we're running an outdoor shelter, all of those clients do have to be registered, just like the clients indoors. And that outside shelter is going to have its own name, such as the Green Valley Church outside or outdoor shelter. You just include the clients that are out there and make your rounds before dark. And again, just like I said earlier, you want to be in pairs and note who is there. And like Hillary said, you're not going to go knocking on people's tents to see who all's in there. You're going to assume that if it was a family that registered, that all of those family members are there in the tent for the midnight count. But then again, check with your shelter manager for any shelter specific instructions on doing that outdoor count. Next slide. All right, some of the typical tasks for doing on the night shift. You're going to catch up on cleaning, sweeping the floors, wiping down the tables and the chairs, taking out the trash. You're going to want to check your inventories and organize all of your snacks. Check how many blankets you've got, comfort kits, that sort of thing. See what might need to be ordered. And this should be done several times a day. So you're going to prepare that inventory needs list for the day supervisor and what we did call E3, which is now called logistics fulfillment. So those are the people that drive around on the larger disaster responses with the supply trucks. So you're going to check the trailer, the shelter trailers that there, straighten up items. Take the inventory of what's in those trailers as well. Organize all of your unsolicited donations. We all know that we're not technically supposed to take those things in, but when a disaster happens, people are very giving and they want to bring stuff in, and it will happen no matter how hard you try to keep from having it come in. So organize the UDM, or unsolicited donations management, and organize your children's areas. So straighten up the registration area, organize your paperwork, organize your shelter log. Sometimes you'll find people just have time to leave sticky notes about an incident that happened, about a client that was taken to the hospital, or that the air conditioning broke down and you had to call a repairman. So just make sure your shelter log is organized. Transfer information, like I said before, into the SKIA, or Shelter Client Information app. Complete and update missing information there. Organize your supplies, your information table, your message board, and be sure to put out all the breakfast items and make the coffee. Going back to the E3, which is now called logistic fulfillment, previously was designated E3, which stands for every shelter, every day, every need. Next one, Iwe. So now it's the middle of the night. You've swept the floors twice. You've cleaned the kitchen and the bathrooms numerous times. You've counted yourself silly. The message board's organized. Everything's done. Now what? You just really don't want to sit there and twiddle your thumbs. If you're sitting there at the registration table, what could you do? Is it okay to take a nap? So got to remember the registration table has to be manned for 24 hours. Information is there that is confidential. Like I said before, people could be coming in late from activities or work and then leaving early for a job. So it's to rest in shifts is generally okay, but you're going to want to check with your supervisor and make sure. If you're resting and there are only, say, 2 of you there working the night shift in that shelter, you're going to want to make sure that you're resting within hearing range in case that other person does have an issue or needs your help with something. Read, watch a movie, work on a puzzle. So a lot of different things you can do to take up time. Next slide. So prepare for your night shift before you deploy, because you never know whether you're going to be on a day shift or whether you're going to be on a night shift. Make sure to bring a good book if you like to read. Pack a puzzle with you that can be done at the shelter. Like I said earlier, it also provides a late night activity for clients. You may set up an area with a big puzzle, and for the first couple of days, no one really pays much attention to it, but by the next couple of days, you're going to find that you've got a whole ton of people wanting to help put that puzzle together. It's amazing how puzzles work. They suggest maybe bring a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's something that even the shelter residents will love to work on. And if you like handicrafts, take a small craft project along with you. Just make sure it's appropriate and doesn't involve any dangerous tools that you would be taking along with you. You can take some edge training. Take a class, take an online class, work on obtaining another gap or taking other courses that just give you better general knowledge about mass care. Sometimes people even bring a laptop to work if they're going to work in the middle of the night, but you might want to check with your supervisor on that one as well. Next slide. And lastly, the night shift is responsible for the coffee. Avoid that riot. Make sure the coffee is ready when the first clients start getting up, and that could be as early as 4:30, or just depending if they're working a weird shift at work, it might even be earlier. And those great big huge pots can take up to 45 minutes to brew a pot. Don't forget, hot water takes time too. It doesn't just automatically happen. This slide says that cups with lids work best. Yes, they do, but we don't often find ourselves with lids for the coffee cups. Check that coffee pot a lot. Old coffee does need to get tossed. Then you can always request additional coffee pots from Logistics Fulfillment. You may need to buy one the first night for the second night if there's not an appropriate one, but don't ask for supplies from social media. And I think that takes us through to the last slide, Iwe. So at this point, Iwe, you want to take over and see if there are any questions or if people need more
Yes.
details?
Yes, thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you so much, Hillary, for putting, and also Chris, for putting this all together and sharing with us, and also to share with us the operational planning tool, the most updated tool. You're also able to find that on one source. I believe the most recent one that was published yesterday that we saw the volunteer connection newsletter. Timothy also putting that there's the most up-to-date version has another line on the very top that shows us how much available staffing we have. So it pulls, we can enter the number from the staffing roster so we can know how many people we have for each group activity and position. So that's going to help us a lot when we do the planning process. Okay, let's go through the question in the chat first, because I'm afraid that more chat is going to come through and I'm going to miss the questions. Then we'll go to the Q&A, then we'll go to raised hands. Okay, let's see if I missed anything. I'm gonna scroll back and to see if we missed anything here. Okay, so for both of you, Hillary and Sandy, is it normal practice for the home region to review your evaluations after you deploy and possibly discuss what you want to do when you grow up?
I like that. So again, with I do workforce in Blue Sky, so I will say yes, it should be practice for your home office to look at your evaluations. And if they're not doing it sort of real time as you deploy and come back, it comes up during the time when you might want to submit a packet for a gap reassignment, aka promotion, because evaluations are required as part of that. So even if they don't look immediately, they may look down the road. And also, unfortunately, there are times where a responder will struggle, or it's just the activity they went out in is not a good fit, or whatever the reason. If someone gets an evaluation that requires some things to be done at home before that person can deploy again, that it's the responsibility of the DRO to let the responder's home region know that there was an issue, and then the home region will take over from there.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Sandy, anything to add?
No, I know a lot of times with the turnover in personnel, those evals don't get looked at by the region, but I think our workforce engagement manager usually takes a look at them anyway. So yeah, no, what Hillary said is great.
Thank you so much. And just like Hillary mentioned, that if you have a needs improvement evaluation, that means anything when you're seeing on the evaluation form that if you have more than half of them being marked inconsistent, you'll receive a needs evaluation um, evaluation. If you receive that, it's automatically, your home region will automatically be notified and you won't be able to deploy, depending on what they mark, but sometimes you will not be able to deploy unless corrective actions are taken. And while we're on this topic, Hillary and Sandy, so we're talking about this, the supervisors evaluating the mentees or the service associates. What happens is if service associates that, or you want to report something of your supervisor, or that you want to have a different position or different role, you just have so much trouble and you want to switch a function. Is there any way to do that in a disaster relief operation?
Yeah, absolutely. If something's just not working, it's not a good fit in terms of the activity, the work you're doing, or there's some sort of interpersonal issue. We do have chain of command, and it's really important to follow that. But obviously, if it's an issue between you and your supervisor and you haven't been able to work that out, you can always go to staff relations, and there is someone is deployed in that role. You'll find them on the roster of the IAP. Sometimes they're virtual, but they're always there to hear from you and help you work out what the best next step might be. And they're part of the workforce activity on the DRO. And sometimes if it's just something where the work itself just isn't a good fit, then you can talk to your supervisor, and there's often situations where somebody will change because we've got an oversupply of shelter workers right now, but we really need DES people, or vice versa, or there's any number of different places if you have training that you can go to. So I definitely recommend people get cross-trained, because then your options are broader. You definitely cannot just say, oh, I'm going to go and work in DES, because if you accepted an assignment in a certain gap, then the expectation is that you will work in that gap unless, like I said, something is worked out between activities on the job. And no poaching people from other activities. That's bad.
And also, I just wanted to mention too that when you're deployed, every night you get a copy sent to your email or your phone of the daily IAP, the information and planning tool, and that has all the contact phone numbers on there that you might need. So if you're looking for somebody in staff relations, that information is there on that document that you have at your disposal every day.
Thank you so much, Sandy. You mentioned a good point for the IAP, the incident action plan. So then, you can look at it. And just like Hillary said, if you want to switch or anything, you do need approvals from both of the supervisor, the current supervisor and the supervisor that is going to accept you for the incoming one. And when I say supervisor, I don't mean your direct supervisor as in one step up. I do mean the function supervisor, someone at the headquarters needs to sign that off. So you can just, switch without telling anyone. Okay, let's go to the next question in the chat. Sandy, both Hillary and Sandy touched that before, but let's re-emphasize this one more time. When we do client counts, do we count clients with access and functional needs? And do we count clients if they're staying in their cars, or if they're staying in their tents or parking lot, etc.? Whom do we count?
Everyone. Yes, yes, and yes.
Thank you so much. Love the answer. Okay, let's see if there's anything else that I'm missing in this chat. Okay, no, you will be entering your own hours for this training. 1.5 hours to this training, you'll be doing on your volunteer connection as well. We are not going to enter for you since we have a very large group across all counties and regions. Okay, I think I finished everything in the chat, and now let's go to the Q&A section. Let's see. 1 second. Oh, we have lots of questions. Let me go back. Hillary, I think this is questions for you. We have slide 28, your lovely drawing. Is it better to have the registration table away from where the people are sleeping?
Yes, it absolutely is. In my imaginary little shelter there, I was just trying to make a visual of that you need to have room for other things in the shelter. But yes, you caught me. I'm going to say that this is in a monsoon, and that little red door near the corner goes to outside, and it's a one-room schoolhouse. And so therefore I had no choice but to put the registration table near the people sleeping.
Thank you so much for explaining.
Okay, I lied. I made that up on the spot. But yes, no, you're right. It's much
No,
better
I
to
think you
not
explained
have
it
that.
perfectly. I think you explained it perfectly. Every situation is different. For Hillary's situation, I think it's perfectly fine when she has the registration table inside, given that the context is that we only have one room, single room to use. Ideally, if you have more room, of course, you will set up the registration outside. But if you only have one room, one single gym has no other spaces, then registration stays inside. So this is really case by case basis. spaces. It's not one size fits all. And of course, that drawing is not to scale either. Okay, let's go to the next question. I really like this question because it shows us that we're planning ahead. The question is, how full should our shelter be before we ask another shelter to be opened?
Oh, that is a really good question. The easy answer for that is that we don't control when other shelters are open because we work at the behest of government agencies. And so they should be saying that it's time to open a new one. But the reality is that I think the answer here is going to depend on what's happening. So if there's a wildfire and it's just started and evacuations have just been called and your shelter is filling up quickly, then as soon as you see that there's uptake of people to shelters, you want to raise that flag to headquarters and say, hey, we've only been open 20 minutes and we've got a line out the door. If you're further down the road in your stabilization phase and things aren't changing much in terms of people arriving at shelters, then you're probably pretty safe in thinking, well, we've got 10 cots, 10 spaces left, and we're averaging one new person in and a couple of people out every day, then you don't have to worry about it quite as much. But that is all, again, part of that communication between the shelter as the eyes and ears on the ground and headquarters that might know something you don't, like they're about to lift evacuations somewhere, or they're about to add areas to the evacuations. And so then you might need to open a new one. But that decision will come at headquarters and at the Emergency Operations Center, typically.
Yep. You just want to stay in constant contact with your manager or with headquarters and let them know if you're seeing an influx or if you think that you're getting dangerously close to being at capacity. You just want to stay in constant contact.
Thank you so much. So we're, the field team, we're the headquarters eyes and ears. We report feedbacks of what we're seeing, and it's not solely based on how many people are actually in the shelter, how full we are. It depends on all other contexts that we're experiencing. Okay, the following two questions are similar, or they're related. One is that all the forms that we mentioned, are they paper forms or are they electronic forms? Two is that because we have so many forms to fill out, as a supervisor, how do you delegate and what forms do you delegate to your team?
Sandy, do you want to start that or you want me to start it?
Yeah. Most of the forms are online. I know even up here in Alaska where we have connectivity issues, the forms are available online, and it's best to use the ones that are online. They're going to be more up to date and more keyed into the actual DR that you're working on. They are all available in OneSource as well, in a paper form, but we try to use the online ones all the time if possible. And then what was the second part of the question?
The second part, it's since we have so many forms to fill out, as a supervisor, how and what would you delegate to your team to fill out the forms?
Oh, Hillary, you want to take that part of that one?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that you should be doing as a supervisor when your team comes in is having conversations with them, job inductions. And at that point, hopefully one of your questions will be, are you detail oriented or are you more of the bigger picture guy? Do you have a computer? Do you like spreadsheets? You can't see me, but I'm smiling big when I say that. It is absolutely acceptable and appropriate to delegate. You can delegate, I'm going to get this wrong, the the responsibility for something, but you can't delegate the accountability. But I might have that backwards. But what I mean is,
I think you're right.
Okay, thank you. Is you can have someone else do it, especially if you've got someone that's a whiz at forms and is super detail oriented and has, like, magic visualization powers and can do a count in 10 seconds flat. Absolutely, you can delegate it, but what you can't do is tell headquarters, well, sorry, the count didn't get in, or sorry, my report didn't get in. I told John to do it and I guess he didn't. So it's still your responsibility, but you can absolutely delegate and should. There's a million things in a shelter that we say in our training: ask your supervisor, talk to your supervisor, supervisor's responsible for this and that. And it doesn't mean that they have to do all those things themselves. It means that they have to ensure that those things get done. I hope that helps answer the question.
Thank you so much. I think it's great. Bottom line is you can delegate as a supervisor, but remember that you're the person responsible for it. So using operational planning tool, the 215 as example, that AD, Assistant Director of Operations, are the ones that runs the tactics. Mass care folks are the one entering it. So if it's not entered, it is mass care's folks' responsibility, but of course, they can delegate. But the final approver and whatnot, the person running the meeting is Assistant Director of Operations. Okay, let's go to a follow-up question. For people that has technical challenges, and if we don't have a laptop, if we don't know where to look at forms, do we have any resources when we get on site or when we get to deployment, that if there's someone that we can ask for tech support?
Yeah. So first of all, you should hopefully have a forms kit, which is like a physical file box with paper forms in it. We're still doing that. We haven't quite gotten to paperless yet. So that's one option. Another option that we use here in my region is we'll put all the important forms on like a little thumb drive, USB drive, flash drive, whatever you want to call it. And you can just bring that tiny little thing with you and plug it into whatever computer might be on site. So that's another option. You are able to get computers for your shelter site through DST, Disaster Service Technology Group. They're under the logistics umbrella, and they've got all the equipment to set you up with phones and hotspots and things like that. The best hot tip that I would give on this subject is remember the 2 words sheltering toolkit. Toolkit's one word. If you search for that on OneDrive, you will have instantly at your fingertips every form and every piece of doctrine that's about sheltering, all on that one page with links to all of them. So you can look it up on your phone. You can look it up on a computer if you get one. And, when I'm in headquarters, I'm not as concerned about getting the daily shelter report in the format of the form that's online. What's important to me is to get the information. So if I know that you're out somewhere, there's no computers on site, or internet is bad, or what have you, I'm okay if you write the stuff down on a piece of paper and take a picture of it and find a way to send me that. I'm okay if you're really, really far out there, like if you're in the villages in Alaska and you have no service of any sort, you could give it to somebody who's going to be back in in headquarters the next day, I suppose. So it's not so much, it's about getting the information in. And if that means you have to call headquarters and give it to someone there, then that's what you have to do. We don't want to get caught up on the specifics of how it gets there as long as it gets there. Not to say that we don't want it in the easiest way for headquarters too, but if it's a problem, I'd rather get it by carrier pigeon than not at all.
Thank you so much. So there are multiple ways that we can do it, whether it's verbal, phone call, whether it's to request an assistant, an admin assistant to help you with all the forms. Okay, we have a clarification from Sherry that fulfillment is part of E3 every day, every shelter, every client. E3 is one of the initiatives that includes this one-on-one calls between the headquarters and the shelter manager, and also the daily sheltering coordination meetings, etc. So E3 is not just fulfillment. Fulfillment is part of E3. And I saw a really good question that I'm hoping that Hillary or Sandy or anyone on this call have answered to. I really don't know the answer to it. Tiffany asked a really good question. How is information being distributed about full shelters? I think we used to see that on Red Cross shelters. We no longer see the capacity. So how do we know a shelter is full if we need to notify the clients?
So a couple things. One is we've mentioned Frost a couple times here. So not only are Frost these mysterious people that collect our counts and put out a report every night saying how many people are in each shelter, they also keep up there's a map, and there's a public facing map and a Red Cross only one. And if there's a shelter that's full, then we will pull it off the public facing map. And also, we want to go to the Red Cross call center, the 1-800 Red Cross, and tell them, don't refer anybody else to that shelter, refer them to this other one instead. We'll want to make sure that all the people in the Emergency Operations Center are aware. So if they're making referrals, they know that, shelter 1 is full, so don't send anybody there, send them to shelter 2. Unfortunately, when you're in a mass evacuation situation, sometimes things are moving too fast to really catch that. And so you open a new shelter, and by the time it's open, there's enough people there that are going to fill it. And so you're a little bit behind, or the world is a little bit behind on saying which shelters are open and available. And so sometimes people will just show up and you have to tell them, we're so sorry, this one's full, but the one down the block is open and is accepting new clients.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is being flexible, communications between the mass care team and also information and planning team, and also with government relations or government ops and elected official liaisons, so we can get all the information updated. We have 3 minutes left. Let's go back to the chat question. Let's see. This is a good question. Should we throw out the old Red Cross forms?
Should we throw them out? God, that would be fun, right?
Replace them.
I would say
That's
no.
a better word.
Yeah. If we were talking about the registration forms, at this point, I would say no, because there are times that there will be a power outage, or there'll be no communication, or nobody at your shelter will have a working phone because internet connectivity is down. So there's always a possibility that you'll need forms. I will say, when I was in Houston last week, we got a call from national headquarters on the bat phone, and they came out to do a pilot of so right now, the way Skya works is it's basically you're entering in the registrations and it's talking to the mothership servers out there outside of your shelter. And that's where all the data is being collected. As we just said, there's times when there won't be internet connectivity, there won't be power, there won't be cell service, any of that. And so they had the foresight to create a system of technology where you can still use it and it will store it all locally. And then once connectivity is restored, or once you go somewhere to a place that does have connectivity, it will send all of that locally held data to the real servers. And despite that technical language I just used, they designed it for your average Red Cross shelter worker. So it's not something where you need to be able to, the old program your VCR. It's more of a plug and play thing. And so they were piloting it in Houston, and they piloted it earlier this year. I think it was this year, for Hurricane Hilary down in San Diego. And so that's pretty promising, that if we're in a giant wildfire or a giant hurricane, we'll still be able to use Skya. It's kind of cool.
Thank you so much, Hillary. It is 5:30. I think we covered most of the questions. Remember to enter your hours on your own. And if you need approving, that will be whomever your DPX team is, your disaster program supervisor, specialist or managers or disaster workforce managers. They'll be approving your hours. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you so much, Hillary and Chris, for presenting this slides. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Same time, same link, same Wednesdays. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Yiwei.